Hey folks, today we're going to be talking a little bit about APA, specifically some of the common issues I see when I'm marking papers in APA, as well as taking you through a little walkthrough of an example APA paper. So as you can see here on your screen, I have an example of an APA paper, and it's actually one that I did myself when I was doing my coursework for my PhD. And I've also made some additions and changes to this paper to reflect the 7th edition of APA, which is what we're currently using, as opposed to the 6th edition, which was what was being used when I wrote this paper in 2017. So as here you can see an example of what a title page looks like in APA. And something I commonly see with APA papers is that students aren't including a title page. And you really want to make sure you're doing this just because, one, it's part of APA, so if there's marks for APA, you want to include it. And it's also really important because a lot of times professors will actually download your paper and then they'll mark it up within Microsoft Word. In my own teaching, I usually just mark within Brightspace, which is the platform that U Ottawa uses, so that connection between the user who submitted it and the file that I'm grading never gets broken. But a lot of professors don't work this way. So say if they've downloaded your paper and there's no title page with your name on it, they may have no idea whose paper this is. So include a title page. So this is what one looks like here. I have my title and my name. The APA manual doesn't explicitly say to include your student number, but I do recommend doing it just in case a professor has, more than one Rachel Grant in their class. Down here, I also have the course number and the course name that I've submitted to this to. The professor, so in this case, I had 2 professors for a course, the institution, and then the date. And it's important to note that this is specifically a title page for a student paper. There are slightly different requirements if it's a professional paper, say if you're submitting it to a journal. And one of the big differences between a title page for a professional paper and for a student paper is the running head. So as you can see from my header here for a student paper, all I have is the page number up here in the top right corner. If you were doing a professional paper, you would have this as well as a shortened version of your title over here on the left, all in caps lock. Personally, I'm fine with my students including a running head or not. It really doesn't matter to me. And the forgetting to include a page number or putting it in the wrong place is something I see very commonly with APA. So if I scroll down here, so as you can see here, when we get down to the main text of my document, I have my title here bolded and centered, which is new to the 7th edition for those of you who are familiar with the 6th. And another thing you might notice here is that citations that include 3 or more people, we now immediately put et al. After the first name. It used to be the first time you put all the names and then you put et al. After. For subsequent citations, now just across the board, we use et al. And another thing you can see scrolling down here is the use of headers. So as you can see here, there's an example of a first level header, a second level header, and a third level header. And headers are something that I really like to use in my writing because I find it helps me keep really organized, and it also helps me structure my paper because I'll write out my table of contents or my headers ahead of time, so it gives me an idea of the structure and the flow I want to have for my papers. But of course, everyone's writing style is different, and some of you will enjoy using headers, and some of you will absolutely hate them, and that is okay. So general formatting issues is something I see quite often done incorrectly in APA when I'm marking papers. So for your papers, you want to make sure you have 1-inch margins all the way around. So you can check this by going to Layout up here, and then over to Margins. And as you can see, right now I have it set just to normal, which for my computer is 1 inch on all ways round. And as you can see, I have it in metric because I'm a Canadian, but that is 1 inch. You also want to make sure you have double spacing throughout the entire document and no additional spacing after your paragraphs. So you can check this by highlighting the text you want to check or your entire paper, and then going up into Home, Paragraph, and this could look a little bit different on your computer depending on what version of Word you have, whether you have a Mac or a PC, but regardless of what edition you have, this will be somewhere under your paragraph menu. And you can see here, so we have down here spacing, so you can see here before and after I have 0 points for after all my paragraphs, and then line spacing is set to double, and you want that through your entire document. And another issue I often see is the first line of paragraphs not being indented. So you want to make sure you're indenting them all as I've done here. And in APA 7th edition, the font type doesn't matter so much anymore. APA used to be fairly strict about that, but now so long as your font type is something that is very easy to read and it is something that's very accessible and that most people would have on their computer, it's fine to use. I find in the faculty that I work in, Times New Roman size 12 is what's most commonly used, and I've seen that a lot too in the publishing world. but there is a lot more flexibility now with the new APA guidelines. So another issue I see get debated a lot is whether you should have 1 or 2 spaces after a sentence. So APA now says that it should just be 1, but they also do say that it's also really up to your instructor or the publisher if you're in the publishing world, so do check with them. I personally, as you can see here, I like to use 2 spaces. I just think it looks nicer. But ultimately with my students, I really don't care if they use 1 or 2 spaces. Whatever works for you. Now another issue I see a lot, we can see down here if we scroll down to page 12. So direct quote. So this is something that I've taken directly from the source and I'm not paraphrasing it. So as you can see, it is in quotations. And then afterwards you want to have your author's name, the year, and then you want to have the page number. And we only do page numbers for direct quotes like this. So if you have paraphrased something and put it in your own words, no page numbers. I know sometimes some professors, especially in undergraduate, will want to see a page number for everything. That's not what APA says to do, and in my experience in this faculty, that is not what the faculty asks of you either. And one little thing that's important to note is that normally we just do the 1P with a period after, and that's for if the entire quote is located on 1 page. If it's something that spills out into multiple ones, then you would want to do PP. So like in this example, if this is page range, I would change it to 2 Ps, and let's say that now it is page 1 to 2. And the rest of it's pretty straightforward, but I'm going to show you the reference list. Oh, and I also will note here that as you can see, I have an introduction and a conclusion section. So that's something that's really important here in APA and just general scholarly writing. So you want to have some sort of introduction, your body paragraphs that talk more about whatever your paper's on, and a conclusion. So much like how we structure our paragraphs. So you want to start off with having some sort of introduction sentence, followed by your body sentences, and then followed by a concluding statement. So now on to references. So here you can see the start of my reference list. So I have references bolded up at the top here, centered. That's new to the 7th edition. And then you can see a few different examples of different citations I had to do for this paper. So the first one here is an example of a journal article. And a really common issue I see here particularly pertains to the use of capitalization in the name of the article. So with a journal article title here, like this one, so you really want to capitalize the first word of the title and of the subtitle, as well as capitalizing after the use of a colon or a dash, as I've done here. And we also capitalize any proper nouns. So if the word Canada appears in a title, you would want to capitalize Canada because it's a proper noun. It's the name of a place. And the same thing applies to the titles of books. So we would do our capitalizations the same way for books. Except with the book, we would use italics for a title, which I'll show you in a moment. Another thing I see with the titles of the actual journals themselves is a lot of students will use the abbreviated journal title, which is more common in other citation styles like AMA, which I know a lot of my students use because I teach a lot of healthcare professionals. But with APA, we want to write out the entire journal name here, as I've done here with this example. And this is done in italics, and it's followed by the volume number, which is done in italics, the issue number in brackets, not italicized, and then this is the page range. And for the page ranges here, for a journal article, we don't put the 2 Ps, even though it is a page range. It's just assumed that if it's occurring at the end, we're talking about the page numbers. Now, as I said, another thing I see a lot of issues with is the use of books. So we're going to scroll down here, and we're going to find an example of a book for us here. So here's an example of a book here. So with this book, as you can see, I've only capitalized the first word in the title. There's no subtitle, no dashes, no colons, no other proper nouns, so there's nothing else being capitalized here. And now with books, we used to put the publisher location, which, I mean, sometimes it's real difficult to figure out where the publisher is actually located, especially if it's a really large international publisher. Thankfully, 7th edition got rid of that, so now we just put the name of the publisher after. And obviously it gets a little bit more complicated if we're talking multiple editions or if we're talking a specific chapter, which I can talk about in a different video. And the last thing I want to touch on here is the use of appendices, which I have a lot of in this paper. I also have a lot of references, as you can see. So if I keep scrolling, here we go. So your appendices go after your references. So this is for materials that are meant to supplement your paper, but could have been kind of distracting or kind of inappropriate to the flow of your paper if you were to include it directly in the paper. So this sometimes is things like additional materials that better explain your methodology, such as interview questions is something we might include in an appendice. So this is really a space for materials that are meant to help your reader better understand your argument or your methodology. Or in my case, it's a place where you can get around word limits for assignments. And as you can see, my appendices go on for quite some time. Still going. There we go. So if your appendice only is just 1 page, you would just call it Appendix. and put the title for it, and that would be that. If you have more than one, like I did in this paper, you would label them Appendix A, and then the next one would be Appendix B, Appendix C, Appendix D, so on. And you put these in the order that you listed them within your paper. And this brings me to an important point, which is your appendices should have come up at some point in your paper. I've had some student papers that got handed in where the appendice really came out of nowhere. Like I was kind of surprised when I got to the end of the reference list and I was like, oh, okay, there's more to the paper, because it wasn't mentioned and it didn't necessarily feel like there was a good connect between what the student was talking about in the paper and what was in the appendice. So make sure you're mentioning it at some point in your paper so the reader knows, like, oh, like in Appendix A here, like she's going to talk a little bit more about like how we classify rural communities in Canada. And in Appendix B, okay, Appendix B is an example of a lesson plan, and that way your reader knows to expect this. So that's all for now, folks. I hope this little overview was helpful and gave you a little bit of a better idea of what an APA paper looks like. If you have any specific questions about APA or things you want me to cover in another video, just let me know and I'm more than happy to do another one. And for those of you who are in one of my classes, I will see you all online.